Once upon a time, at the dawn of the last century, a woman named Liza Hartman lived in this house, known in the area as a talented doll maker. Her dolls were amazing, each of them looked like life, and customers were ready to pay huge amounts of money for her work. However, no one knew what price Liza herself paid for her art. It was said that she spent whole nights studying ancient books and experimenting with occult rituals in order to bring to life her creations. "The soul is the key to ideal beauty," she liked to repeat. One day, her little son Theodore disappeared. Surrounded by rumors and suspicions, Liza withdrew into herself, continuing to work on dolls. However, her works became darker, and the doll's eyes filled with a frightening gleam, as if they were watching you. After her mysterious death, the house was left empty and the dolls disappeared, as if they had dissolved into time. Many, many years have passed. The city was shining with colorful lights and was full of children's laughter. Little Lisa, walking with her parents, noticed an antique doll on one of the counters. It looked different from the other toys, an old-fashioned dress, a pale face and piercing blue eyes. Lisa excitedly exclaimed, asking her parents to buy this doll. Her parents, not seeing anything unusual in it, agreed. A few days after the purchase, Lisa began to notice oddities. The doll, which she left on a chair, ended up in another part of the room. "Mom, the doll moves by itself," Lisa said in surprise. Mom just laughed, attributing it to her daughter's rich imagination. But one night Lisa woke up with the feeling that she was being watched. Turning on the light, she saw that the doll was sitting on her bed with an eerie smile. It all started out quite ordinary. Lisa, as usual, was sitting in her room, surrounded by plush toys and colorful books. A new doll, which she called Emmi, stood out among all this cozy chaos. It was an antique, a pale porcelain oval face, eyes, bottomless blue lakes, and a dress, as if from another era. Lisa delightedly dressed the doll, told her about her day, and even read fairy tales aloud. But soon the joy began to give way to anxiety. When Lisa picked up Emmi, it seemed to her that the doll was getting heavier with each passing day. Sometimes, while playing, she caught herself thinking that these eyes were watching. As if there was something alive in the doll. Nonsense, the girl pulled herself up. However, at night, something changed. The silence in the room no longer calmed her down, but rather oppressed her. Muffled sounds, as if someone was whispering, came from the corners. Lisa tried to ignore it, but one day she noticed that Emmi was not where she had left her. "Mom, it seems the doll is moving," Lisa said anxiously at dinner. Her words were drowned out by her parents' laughter. "Of course," her mother answered, trying to hide her slight concern behind a smile. "You must have dreamed it." But Lisa knew something was wrong. By nightfall, her head would start to spin, and a strange heaviness would appear in her chest. She would go to bed with the feeling that the room was coming to life and becoming her enemy. And every time before going to bed, turning to the shelf where Emmi was sitting, the girl would whisper, "You're just a toy, right? Mom, this doll is weird." Lisa tried to convince her parents. She persistently explained how the doll moved, how its gaze followed her, how strange sounds were heard at night. "Mom, it's like it's alive," the girl almost screamed. But her mother only grinned and shook her head. "Lisa, you just watched too many movies and you're scaring yourself." Her father didn't take her seriously either. "It's just a toy, stop making things up," he said, continuing to read the newspaper. Despair grew inside Liza. Her parents' words, their slight grin and indifference, like knives, pierced her heart. She began to doubt herself. Maybe I really made this up? Maybe I've just gone crazy? But every time she was alone, the doll reminded her of itself, with its gaze, rustling, or strange, barely audible whisper. The next day, Liza met an old woman on the street who suddenly stopped when she saw the doll in the girl's hands. Her eyes flashed with alarm, and she leaned slightly towards Liza, whispering, "This doll is not a toy. It brings trouble. Destroy it before it's too late." "What do you mean?" Liza muttered, clutching the doll even tighter. The woman approached, her wrinkled face distorted with worry. "This thing is associated with pain and loss. You can't just leave it in your house. It will take everything that is dear to you." Liza felt a chill run down her spine. It seemed that these words penetrated directly into her consciousness, as if the woman's voice echoed in her own thoughts. "I can't. She's just a doll." The girl tried to object, but her voice trembled. "Do you see how she looks at you? She knows that you are weak. But remember, as long as she's around, you're not safe." The woman turned sharply and disappeared around the corner, leaving Liza in complete confusion. That night, Liza decided to take action. Leaving Emmi in the room had become unbearable. She lit a candle to light the way, and, clutching the doll in one hand, headed for the basement. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the hallway, and the weak flame of the candle cast eerie shadows on the walls, as if the darkness itself was trying to stop her. When she reached the basement door, Liza froze. She felt her throat dry up, and her heart was beating so loudly that it drowned out even her own thoughts. Gathering her courage, she pulled the creaky handle, and the heavy door opened. The basement greeted her with icy air that smelled of dust and something old, almost forgotten. The girl slowly began to descend the stone steps, trying not to look into the depths of the darkness. A thick, ominous silence reigned below. Liza held the candle closer to her, illuminating the shelves with jars and boxes. She stopped at an old wooden box, placed the doll inside with trembling hands, and quickly slammed the lid shut. "Now you won't find me," she whispered, trying to convince herself. But at that moment, a sound came from the depths of the basement, a rustling sound, then light steps, as if someone small was making their way through the boxes. Liza froze. Her feet seemed to have grown to the floor, and only one thought was heard in her head: run. She rushed up the steps, but something below kept moving. The footsteps were getting louder, as if someone she couldn't see was climbing up behind her. Liza tripped on the top step, pain shooting through her knee, but she didn't stop. When she reached the door, the girl slammed it shut and propped it up with a chair in panic. She was breathing heavily, looking at the handle, expecting it to start turning at any moment. There were knocks behind the door. Muffled, even, frighteningly measured. Liza covered her ears with her hands, trying not to hear, but the knocks were getting louder, echoing in her head. "Liza," she heard her mother's voice. The girl shuddered, turning around. Her mother was standing in the doorway, looking at her daughter with incomprehension. "Mom, there's something in the basement." Liza pressed herself against the wall, her voice shaking. The mother came closer, looking at her daughter with weariness. "Enough already, Liza. You've really worked yourself up." The woman took a step toward the basement door and reached for the handle. "No. Don't touch it." Lisa screamed, grabbing her mother's hand. But she pulled away. "You're imagining things too much. Let's see what's really there," the mother said, abruptly opening the door. The noise in the basement suddenly died down, and silence fell upon them. But Lisa saw, from the depths of the darkness, eyes were looking at them. Glowing, cold, unreal. The mother turned to her daughter, her face distorted by a strange smile. "It's okay, Lisa," she said, her voice sounding alien. "We just want to play." Lisa froze, her breath caught, and her feet seemed to have grown to the floor. Her mother stood before her, but something in her gaze was more frightening than any shadow in the basement. "It's not her," flashed through the girl's mind. Her mother's eyes, empty and cold, seemed to look through her. "Come here, Lisa," her mother repeated, taking a step forward. Her voice was strange, as if from far away, filled with echoes of something alien. Lisa ran away, skirting her. Her heart was torn out of her chest as she rushed past the kitchen and grabbed the handle of her room's door. Slamming it shut, the girl quickly pushed the furniture to block the entrance. Footsteps were heard behind the door. Heavy, slow, each movement echoed in her mind. "Mom," she whispered, but there was no answer. Only a weak whisper, "Lisa, open up." The girl turned around and froze. The doll sat on her bed, its porcelain face shining in the soft moonlight, its piercing blue eyes seeming to stare straight into her soul. Lisa's hands shook as she retreated toward the wall, feeling the silence of the room become unbearable. You can't be here," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. The doll suddenly tilted its head, as if studying Lisa, and then quietly laughed. It was a child's laugh, but with some eerie, unnatural tone. The girl wanted to scream, but her voice was stuck in her throat. Lisa grabbed the nearest book and threw it at the doll. The toy fell to the floor, but the laughter did not stop. It was heard from everywhere, filling the room. "You can't run away from me," a whisper was heard. Lisa pressed herself against the wall, her breathing became intermittent. She knew that she had to do something, but fear paralyzed every movement. For a moment, it seemed to her that the air became heavy, as if the room itself had come to life. Gathering her last strength, the girl grabbed the candle and ran out of the room. She ran downstairs, towards the kitchen, where there was an old fireplace. "If I burn it, this will end," flashed through her head. The doll lay motionless on the floor, but Lisa did not dare to come closer. Finally, taking a stick from the fireplace, the girl carefully pushed the doll towards the fire. The flames instantly engulfed the porcelain head, and a long scream burst out of it. Lisa covered her ears, unable to bear the sound. But she did not move away until the doll was completely reduced to ashes. Silence. Finally, the house sank into an oppressive, absolute silence. Lisa collapsed on the floor, feeling like her legs were no longer holding her up. Her chest heaved, her breath came out in convulsive jerks, and her heart pounded so loudly that it seemed about to jump out. She looked at the smoldering remains of the doll in the fireplace, and tears welled up in her eyes. Bitter, burning tears. "I did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is the end." But her words sounded empty, as if she herself did not fully believe in them. Lisa clutched the piece of burnt dress in her trembling hand, as proof of her victory, and a bitter smile touched her lips. At that moment, her parents entered the kitchen. Her father stopped at the threshold, and her mother came closer, frightened. Lisa, what happened here? She asked, her gaze darting between her daughter and the fireplace. The girl did not answer. She only pressed the charred piece of dress tighter to her chest. Her voice sounded only inside, now everything will be fine. Now I am safe. But deep in her soul, a shadow of doubt still stirred, a barely audible whisper. What if this is not the end yet? Epilogue. Years later, Lisa still remembered every moment of those terrible events. They became not only a childhood nightmare for her, but also an obsessive reality that she tried to understand and overcome. Her small apartment was furnished modestly, but in every corner there were protective amulets and candles, and the walls were strewn with symbols that she had drawn from ancient books. Lisa became a paranormal researcher, dedicating her life to studying things like that doll. She met with mediums, historians, and even tried to contact the woman who created the dolls herself. Her work took her to the darkest corners of the world, but the fear never left her. Every night, when she closed her eyes, she heard that same quiet whisper, "We will always be together." This voice haunted her since childhood, becoming her eternal companion. Lisa learned to ignore it, but deep down she knew it was only temporary. Then one morning, she found that the protective circle drawn in chalk by the door had been erased. On the kitchen table lay a doll. Its porcelain face, covered in tiny cracks, smiled with an ominous, familiar smile. Lisa sank to her knees, her breathing uneven, but instead of panicking, she rose, confidently took the doll in her hands and said, "You can't win." Now her fight was personal. She knew she would do anything to break the bond that had shackled her life. But could she defeat something that was always one step ahead?